morning, our viewers. Welcome to the Women's Voice, a platform for women rights initiative. Thank you for following this conversation. Today, we are honored to have the country director, MenEngage, Gender Equality Network. I'll let him introduce himself before we start this conversation.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on the Women's Voice, to be able to add my voice to the Women's Voice. My name is Hassan Sekajoolo. I am the country director for MenEngage Uganda, and I have been at the work of engaging men and boys since 2016, when I got into the movement and started to do work to engage men and boys for gender equality. So that's where my current passion lies, and I am determined to do whatever it takes that men and boys become part of the solution to eliminating gender inequalities across the globe. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Hassan, we have been learning on this platform issues of gender-based violence and how women are affected and how we can together end this pandemic. But today, I'm happy that we are going to be speaking about gender-based violence, but in regards to men. And I know that most of the people that are following are now familiar with, that have been following are familiar with gender-based violence or abuse. But for those that have just followed today, we want to understand what probably domestic violence is or what is gender-based violence before we speak about what it looks like for men to be survivors or victims of GBV.
Okay. I have mixed feelings, Annette, and I'll put those feelings out. Why do I have mixed feelings? When we talk about gender-based violence, we know that men and women are gendered species. That's okay. Both of them are gendered species. We also know that gender inequalities affects women and gender inequalities affect men. When we talk about gender-based violence, we need to be careful what we are referring to. Why? Because the statistics that we have, especially in our country, Uganda, that show from the police crime reports that show that the number of men involved in domestic violence or gender-based violence cases is going up. We need to stop and think. One of the questions we're asking ourselves, those of us who are working with men and boys, is now these cases that are reported to police that are involving men, are they of a gendered nature? We need to get behind the figures and find out whether these cases are of a gendered nature. Okay? Part of our finding has been that, one, the cases are mainly reported by older men, 50 years and above. Those are more likely to go and report a case for many reasons. One, they have become vulnerable because of age and many other issues. So they will most likely go and report. But the men who are still younger in their youth, they are below 50, they don't make big numbers of those who are reporting violence, especially in a home setting. And also, when we continue to interact with the men who are reporting violence cases to police, because we do have a cooperation with police that allows us to mediate in these issues, we find out that many of these cases, when you get deeper to investigate them, these are cases that I can say is a revenge, if I can use the word revenge. But these are cases where you find that oppression has been happening for a very long time, and women suddenly try to fight back. they try to push back the oppression. That is when you get men making numbers of domestic violence cases, of gender-based violence cases. Now, that is something for us to learn from and also be worried about, okay? Because men men can be part of, there's a difference between gender-based violence against men and men's violence or violence on men. There's a difference there. Gender-based violence on men is different from violence meted out on men. Those are two completely different things. And we need to be careful not to mix them, because when we do mix them, we run a risk of depoliticizing the women's agenda of fighting and eliminating gender-based violence. We depoliticize that work. So we must be careful and say, we are looking at violence meted out on men in a domestic setting and not call it gender-based violence on men, because then we are understanding the things quite differently. Because that violence that men get from a domestic setup is not because of their gender as men. No. And yet the violence women get in a domestic setup is because of their gender as women. So after we differentiate these two things, then we're able to say, what is it we are talking about? And what strategies can we put in place to end what we are talking about? Okay? For all the cases, like I've said, of men reporting violence, there has been gender-based violence before men experience violence. So then we say, what is the root cause of violence on men? The root cause is that men have perpetuated gender-based violence on women. That is why men, especially the older men, end up receiving violence too, as a fight back mechanism of women who have been oppressed. Okay? So now that goes, okay, then what happens? What happens in this situation? Then we say, we will treat each situation a case-by-case basis. Okay? First, we will work with the women, because now the woman becomes a survivor of gender-based violence. And we should not risk calling the man a survivor of gender-based violence too. Because when we do that, we are mixing up issues and we're taking away attention from gender-based violence. Okay? Yes, we know. Then somebody will say, then can't men be part of gender-based violence? Yes, men can be part of gender-based violence once the context is correct. One such scenario where men can be part of gender-based violence is when, for example, a transgender man, okay, receives violence from fellow men for being transgender. Then we can say that type of violence is gender-based violence on this transgender man. Okay? Then we say, okay, this is where it is. That is good. But for every man who is involved in a gender-based violence case or dies or, receives bodily harm, we need to be careful how we interpret that situation and how we want to term that situation. Okay? Unless you get to the core to understand that, okay, this man actually received this violence from this woman because of his gender of being a man. That is why he received the violence. Otherwise, we will say that men are experiencing violence in a domestic setup. Then we say, what is causing that? What is causing that? Like how we've been able to go behind it and find that, there's a long story of women oppression by this man until women say, enough is enough. They respond violently too, because we all know we learn violence. Okay? So now the question is, why do men perpetuate gender-based violence? That's the big question. Why do they perpetuate this gender-based violence? They do because of the beliefs that men have about women. And yet, if a boy or a man has a belief about a woman which is demeaning, which is disrespectful, that boy, when he grows up to become a man, will never respect a woman and will go on to abuse women. That is the core that makes men abuse women. It's about the beliefs they have about what women are. That belief determines how they behave. They either slap you in the face or shut you down, don't give you audience to talk. It's about the belief they have about a woman. If a man's belief is a woman cannot advise you, a woman is a weaker sex, a woman is, if those are the beliefs the man holds about women, that man, it's just a matter of time, will abuse women. No doubt about it, because that's the belief they have. So what then do we need to do? Okay? When we work with perpetrators of violence, of gender-based violence, especially the men, we hold conversations with the men. And these conversations are intended to change the belief they have about women. And for most men, it's amazing to hear what beliefs they hold about women. It's amazing the beliefs men hold about women. So you want to work with these women, with these men rather, in a conversation so that one, they admit the actions they have done. Okay? And then you ask them what consequences can come out of what you have done. Because you must not let men blame other people for what they have done. No. They are the ones who have meted out violence, and they need to take responsibility for that violence and go through a process of internal reflection about what they have done. Okay? Now, you aim to change those beliefs that man, that boy has about a girl, has about a woman. When you change those beliefs and men begin to look at women and think about women with value, with respect, with equality, that is when you are making men part of the solution of eliminating gender-based violence. Many people, many organizations are working with men. They're saying we're working with men to end gender-based violence. But the question is how? It's not about bringing men in the room. No, it's about methods that you use to understand the belief that these men hold about women, and you change the belief. That is the how. Because if you don't change the belief, the men will leave your room, your workshop, your training, and will go back and abuse the women. Because you have done nothing to change their belief about women. They'll go back and abuse them. And you'll say, this change agent has really ashamed us. He undertook our training. We didn't expect him to do that. You see? Because you have not touched the core that makes men abuse women. So we need to change beliefs that men have. When we change these beliefs, that is not enough, because it's not about changing the individual man. No. It's about getting men to be part of the solution so that they are eliminating gender-based violence in a social change setup. So we need these men whose beliefs have changed to go and influence other men and change the beliefs of other men, so that we're creating a critical mass of men who believe women as equals, who believe women as equal partners, women as respectable partners. So when we create this mass movement of men who believe that, then we are saying that is how we are working with men for gender equality. That is how men, as a critical mass, are making a contribution to alleviate the suffering that women are going through, because now men have a new belief about who a woman is. That over to you.
Thank you so much. It's interesting how you're tackling the topic, because as we speak about men as survivors of domestic violence, or as gender-based violence in regards to men, I love that you're speaking about how women retaliate because they've been abused for a long time. And if we speak about men learning how to respect women, and also learning how to treat women, it's then going to help us to just not have a lot of cases that come up because women are retaliating. And but specifically for those cases that you've handled, uh, as you're sharing with us, you said that you specifically engage with men. Are there particular cases that come? They might be because women are retaliating, or because men are experiencing domestic violence in a domestic setup. What are those cases that really come out specifically for men?
Majority of the cases, Annette, and the people who are following us, are about this man has failed in his duty. Okay? So when the man fails in his duty, the woman takes it upon herself to remind the man of his duty. Now, this is where we say that gender inequalities affect both men and women. Okay? Because then we have to say, okay, the man has failed in his duty. And when the woman tried to remind and stamp her effort, and you know tempers flare, and before you know it, one has really hit the other very hard. And for older men, because the vulnerability, they are no longer that strong and macho and what, okay, when they get hit and get hit very hard, and you see the older men have much younger women, so when they get hit and get hit very hard, then they will go and report that I have been beaten. Aha. So then we say, okay, in most of these cases we're mediating, you find that it's an issue of gender roles. Many of the conflicts that happen where men are involved, it's an issue of gender roles. Now, these gender roles, both the man and woman can't quite understand and get out of that box of gender roles to be able to live in a mutual relationship. So the woman says, you have to buy food, you have to pay school fees. I'm always telling you, the man says, I don't have money. So you bring these two couples to understand that these are gender roles. But how can we work together? How can we make the role of provision, okay? Much of our campaign when we're mediating is this gender role of provision for the family. How do we make it a dual role? How can men accept that putting the whole weight of provision on yourself is not something sustainable? Because today you are able, tomorrow you are not. So if the role rests on you, when men are unable to do the roles that society has given them, they become very insecure. And that's where violence normally starts from. Okay? So how do we then talk to the men and talk to the women to understand that this gender role of provision is not a role that rests on the man, is not a role that rests on the woman? Okay? How can both of us, as people who are in this relationship, mutually cooperate to provide for the family that we have? Because that way we are making the foundation of a relationship. Okay? So people can speak to each other, are communicating, mutually understand each other, they respect each other, and they're working together for the general good of their family. So bringing both the man and the woman, taking taking the gender expectation out of a woman, that provision is not does not only rest on a man, is hard. But also convincing a man to say that this is not entirely your role, it must be shared, is also hard. Because they say, that's what makes me a man. I mean, when I'm working with men and ask, what makes you a man? They'll talk about provision, they'll talk about marriage, they'll talk about money, these are the things they talk about. And then you ask them, if you're unable to provide, does that make you less of a man? Say, man, everyone will look at you and say you're unable to provide. How can you have a family that you're unable to provide for? So you see, society has cast it on them that it's theirs. So to take it out of them to accept duo is a problem. Some even go to the extent of saying, you will not work, I'm here to provide. Even the educated ones, very highly educated, doctors, lawyers, they say, no, you are not working, it's my role to work and provide for you. You see? So it's a tough job. It's a tough job. And when we do our work, we are doing our work with men and women together. Okay? And when we're working with them together, we are saying we are empowering the woman and we are educating the man. That's what we do. Because for us as MenEngage, we don't believe that men need to be empowered. We don't believe in that. What we believe in is that men need to be educated, while women need to be empowered. Okay? We give the women power and educate men to understand how to relate with this powerful woman. That we create a balance. We get a 50-50. But the situation is, even highly educated men do not understand how to work and live with empowered women. They don't know. They also need support. When you find highly educated women, they have gone to school, they have degrees, but the husband has refused them to work, and they have nowhere out. Excuse me. They have no way out of it. So to get this couple to demystify the gender roles and expectations that they have is a tough job, a pretty tough job. But nonetheless, we do this tough job and we are slowly generating results from the people that we are working with. It's a fallacy for people to say, those men in the rural areas, Hassan, need your work more. Those ones down there. That's a big lie. And it's the biggest lie I have found working with men and boys. That men in the rural areas are the ones who need these sessions. No. Men in the middle class, in the urban centers, need this even more than the ones in the villages. Because for them, they think that once I have money, everything will work out because I have money. No, that's not how things work. So we have to continuously engage the men. We have to continuously empower women. I'm also not a believer of the current talk that, boys have been neglected. Boys have been neglected. We need to uplift the boy child. I don't believe that. I really don't believe that. I'm sorry, but I don't believe. And I've said it time and again that there's this talk of boys have been neglected is diversionary, wants to take us away from the real work that we need to do for women and girls, because you cannot be in a patriarchal setup, and you bring rhetoric of boys are neglected. What are you talking about? Boys are neglected in a patriarchal setup. What is it that you're talking about? Let's be open and say we have a parenting crisis. But not to say boys have been neglected, we need to pull up boys. No, we just have a parenting crisis. And that's what we need to deal with, so that the parents know how to raise boys and know how to raise girls. Until we dismantle patriarchy, we can't talk about boys have been neglected, boys have been left behind. We also need to look at the boy child. I don't believe in that. So as we work, we have to make sure that the survivors, these men who survive violence, either from women or from fellow men, how do we work with them? Okay? Yes, we believe that for safety reasons, women have to be taken away in a shelter or some other place, okay? But then what do we do with the man? As we take women to the shelters, what are we doing for men? What programs do we have for the male perpetrators of this violence? So we need to strengthen that area. All of us who have GBV shelters, we need to strengthen the area and add programs for the men. How do we reach out to the men and also do some work with them so that we transform the beliefs that they have, so that we can support men to manage anger? Okay, we have the 6 steps to support men to avoid being violent. Okay, just 6 little steps. So how do we put this into the programs of the GBV shelters such that, because we can't stop women from making their choices. When we're doing the survivor-centered approach, you don't advise. If a woman wants to go back to that marriage, you cannot say, no, you cannot go back, because then you're doing what's not your work. Because 90% of women, after their time at the shelters, will choose to go back to this marriage. But we kept the woman for 3 weeks at the shelter and did nothing with the male perpetrator. So this is where we come in to build alliances and say, we also need to do work with the male perpetrators. And that's what we do for us at MenEngage, and say, hey, this and this happened. How do you feel about what happened? It's now 1 week, 2 weeks, your wife is not at home. How do you feel about what happened? What are the consequences? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to make sure this does not happen again? Okay? What type? So these are the types of conversations we engage in, so that we try and make men non-violent, because we believe peace is possible. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Such a learning session for everyone and for us that are in the line of work of ending GBV. And sharing with you, Hassan, you were speaking about abuse that has been happening, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been worse. Uh, we've received a lot of cases around neglect, and also I would love for you to speak more about, probably because as we speak about the issue of probably understanding that shared responsibilities is probably a way to go, or we need to work together as a couple or as a family. We need for you to probably share with us, because you've engaged men that are perpetrators and also those that are survivors or victims. We want to understand, in a home setting, can there be signs that you can see and know that probably things are not moving in a way that is appropriate? Or because for us, as we speak to the communities, or as we speak to survivors, at least we have those that we can say are warning signs of abuse. And now that we are speaking about a family or a home, we want to know from your knowledge base, are there warning signs that we can see probably and say that things are not going right, or this can lead to abuse? Please share with us.
Yes, thank you, Annette. The warning signs are there, but unfortunately we miss them. And we get to the physical beating. That's when everybody comes in to say, now something wrong has happened. We need to do something about it. You spoke about COVID-19. One of the biggest lessons we learned from COVID-19 was that we have men who don't know how to stay at home. They have families, but these men don't know how to stay at home. That was a big learning for us. And in our fatherhood program, we are adjusting to make sure that as we work with men in the fathers groups, we actually support them to understand how to stay at home. Because that was a huge gap that the lockdown exposed. Men just know how to stay in the houses, but not to stay at home. Okay? Because to stay in a house, you just come and open and enter and sleep and shower and, and sleep. But to stay at home involves managing relations with everyone at home, the children, your spouse. If you have elder persons at home, how do you manage those relations? Now, lockdown showed that men don't know those things. They just know how to stay in the house. So, warning signs. One of the most visible warning sign that is often ignored by women but also men is when the person you are staying with begins to find fault in things around home. That's a warning sign. And it's one of the earliest signs. When everything around, it can be a woman doing it, it can be a man doing it, it can be a child doing it. One of the earliest signs is that you find a mistake on everything, almost everything around home, you are finding a mistake. Okay? That shows that the social order has broken down in this home. And once the social order breaks down, the next thing is use of violence. So how do we detect if Annette complains about a knife, complains about a jerrycan, complains about a saucepan, complains about a bed sheet, you know there's something wrong. That's the earliest sign. But normally, that sign is missed because, it's just a comment. But when that comment is sustained, okay, sometimes you'll hear partners say, these days I don't understand. You're complaining about everything. Those are the earliest warning signs. So what partners should be able to detect these signs and say, how do I restrain myself from getting to the violence stage? How do I restrain myself? Then the other sign is that when people stop talking to each other, it can be children, it can be a partner, it can be a spouse. When they stop talking to each other, even if it is for one day, that is also a warning sign. Why are people not talking to each other who are staying in the same roof? What has happened that they are not talking to each other? Can they be able to mend relations? What has been the contribution of either party in this not talking to each other? What is the contribution of people in one picking faults in almost everything? What is the contribution? Okay? So these early warning signs are never detected. And yet, they are the ones that switch on emotional abuse, because that is the first level. These ones are the ones that trigger emotional abuse. Then emotional abuse goes on for quite some time before we see physical abuse. But unfortunately, for us to go to the DV shelter, we go there when physical abuse has happened. That's when we go to the shelter. The shelter also has no mechanisms of intervening, but also the partners have no mechanisms of detecting early abuse, because emotional abuse is one of the early signs of abuse. And once you detect emotional abuse, are things like saying words that lower the dignity of another person. Those words that trigger anger into somebody, those are emotional abuse. If it is to a child, the things that you say that suddenly make this child cry, even if you have not touched them, it means you have emotionally antagonized the child. That is why they are crying. So how do we detect these things and be able to make amends? We make mistakes, but the most important thing is, how do you learn from the mistakes? How do you learn as a parent your mistake talking to your child so that you learn from that mistake and speak better next time, so that you don't cause emotional turbulence in your child. As a man, how do you learn that your language, your choice of words have caused an emotional disturbance in your wife, in your partner, so that you learn what words to use? Very few people have the courage to say, that is an insult to me. I would appreciate you don't use that language on me again. Very few people have the courage to say that, because that is a mitigation measure for emotional abuse. When you speak out and say, that's an insult, please don't use those words on me again. Very few people can do that. How do we live above cultural practices? How do we live above social indoctrination of how we manage relationships? Because there's also that element, the way we are socialized, the way we are taught how to behave, okay? How do you live above that and be able to detect that, no, this is an abuse on me, but not the right way I should behave? Okay? All these are complex things that we have to deal with and be able to mitigate, be able to unpack, so that we are able to live in equal relationships and in equal measure. Because socialization is one of those things that teach us how to behave. And when they teach us how to behave, they're also teaching us how to become submissive, how to subdue, how to accept oppression is also taught to us. So the question is, how do you live above that socialization and you are able to detect that this is an abuse and speak out against it? So these are very critical things that we need to be able to look out for. If you're a parent, how are you socializing your children? How are you teaching them behavior? How are you teaching boys to behave towards girls? How are you teaching girls to behave towards boys, towards older men, towards older women? These are critical things, but we ignore them as we do our parenting. So, if we are going to achieve gender equality, if we are going to achieve any steps towards dismantling patriarchy, towards, get to 50-50, we will need, one, look at the family. And when we say we're looking at the family, we are looking at socialization. We're looking at how we're teaching people to behave. That's quite important, that we look at socialization. Two, we are looking at how are we doing our parenting? Because we all know that people learn violence. So if people learn violence, where is the first place to learn violence from? The first place to learn violence from is at home. That's where we learn violence from. The way we see older persons around us solving conflicts around them. That's how we learn violence. That's how girls, that's how boys learn violence, from the way we do parenting. So, if we want to make sure that we raise boys, we raise men who are non-violent, we have to check our parenting methods, so that the way we parent does not teach these young people that violence can be used. Why? Because one reason why men are abusive, why men become violent, the reason is, for men, violence is a tool, a strategy for control. That's why men become violent. Because they know that when they shout at you, when they back you down, you'll not do what they don't want you to do, or you'll do what they want you to do. So that's why they become abusive. That's why men become abusive. But where do they learn this from? They learn from other men. They learn from home. They learn from how other men are doing things. That's how they pick up these habits. Okay? So when we're saying, oh, we are working on gender-based violence, yes, that is good. But then we need to understand the stages of how people learn violence. We go and uproot violence from those stages, such that the result that we get in a woman, the result we get in a man, is one who is non-violent. Because it is possible. It's really possible.
Yes,
Okay?
Hassan,
Yes.
as we as we conclude the show, because we are left with a minute, I
Mm,
think that we will have to continue this conversation because it's been interesting to learn, and
mm,
I know that our viewers are still wanting. But for today, I want you to conclude by telling us more about MenEngage and how people can
mm,
reach you, because it's very, very, very important for communities to know that as we help women survivors of gender-based violence, there's also work to do with perpetrators, and it's a component. So please share
mm.
with us as we conclude. Uh,
Okay. We are MenEngage Uganda is located at Ntinda. We are in Ntinda. It's plot 154. You can just get a pin. And if you want to reach us, you send us an email, info@menengageuganda.org. As simple as that, info@menengageuganda.org. Or you can send an email direct to me, hassan@menengageuganda.org. Then I'll be able to receive that. And then we'll be able to guide you on how you want to join MenEngage, on how you take advantage of our capacity building programs and many of our advocacy efforts. So I'll take this opportunity to thank you, Annette, and the Women's Rights Initiative for inviting me to the Women's Voice so that I'm able to add my voice so that the women's voice can be heard. Yeah, because
thank you so
it's
much.
not about having women there, it's about hearing what they have said. Can you hear what they are saying and take action? Not to say, no, we have women. Women are there, we have them. But when they talk, you do nothing. You don't respect what they say. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And for our viewers, we are ending it here. Thank you so much for following. Until next week, same day and same time. May God bless you.
Thank you very much.